history, Bob, if I may. Well, I was probably maybe one of the first 5 GPCM users, or something like that, back in the Stone Ages, when laptops were new. And Bob Brooks always had the coolest laptop, and I always had some big clunky box that was like just barely met the minimum specs to run GPCM. So anyway, those were the days. Okay, and if you all don't mind, I'm going to kind of work from my paper notes because I've added some, little commentary to the ones that you have. Okay, so I'd like to start off. My uncle gave me a really hard time. It's like, John, you can't possibly be quoting Victor Hugo and your own quote on the same page. He says, isn't that very presumptuous of you? I said, yeah, I guess it is. So anyway, I love this quote. There's nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come. That's from Les Miserables. And I actually believe, along with Boone Pickens and some other people, that the time has finally come to use a domestic resource that we have in abundance, that's clean. We produce it right here. We don't have to worry about protecting it with the Navy, all over the world. And I'm talking about natural gas for transportation. It's not really a new thing. There have been various attempts to do it over the years with, kind of fits and starts. But a lot has come together in the last decade or so, and particularly really in the last 3 or 4 years in terms of the technology. And of course, all the market conditions have come to fore at the same time, as have environmental considerations, economic considerations, financial considerations. So it finally seems that this is an idea whose time has come. So my quote, which is not as profound as Victor Hugo's, but I think I'm going to make a play about mine, anything that runs on diesel or gasoline will run better on natural gas. Now, I could have said better, better in what way? Well, if we produce it right here, so it doesn't come from overseas, that's one way it's better. So that's jobs for Americans to go out there and produce it and create all the infrastructure and do all the things that we can do with it that we're not doing now. It's cleaner. Natural gas vehicles, trucks that run on natural gas are 45% cleaner than trucks that run on diesel. And automobiles that run on natural gas, like the Honda Civic, for example, are about 35% cleaner than automobiles that run, even the cleanest automobile that runs on gasoline. Interestingly enough, at the Los Angeles Auto Show 2 years ago, Toyota took a standard run-of-the-mill Camry hybrid, and they took out the gasoline tank, and put in a natural gas tank, and they had a CNG hybrid. It was a concept car. People go, wow, this is great. You could actually make that better. Okay, so how could you make that better? So, now you've got the benefit of you're using the cleanest hydrocarbon to run the gasoline part. You still have the hybrid just like a Prius and whatnot. But a way that you can make it better is to have that car be a bi-fuel hybrid, where you have what I call a pony tank, a little, say, 3-gallon gasoline tank, so that if you find yourself in a situation where you cannot access the natural gas as a dedicated natural gas vehicle, like the Honda Civic only runs on natural gas. They don't make a bi-fuel Honda Civic. But if you had a pony tank, just say a secondary tank that's kind of a reserve tank, you could literally drive across the country, even today, in a bi-fuel automobile that runs on natural gas. Because if you find yourself where you can't get the natural gas, then you just run on gasoline. Now, as amazing as that may sound, 8 years ago now, when I lived in Brazil, I had a Land Rover to go out in the field because the roads aren't so good, at least where I lived in Brazil. But to drive around town, I had a little Fiat station wagon, a little Palio station wagon. And that car was a flex fuel, bi-fuel automobile, which, wow, that's a lot of terms. Flex fuel, well, it would run on gasoline or ethanol, and their ethanol comes from sugarcane, which is 3 times more efficient than our corn ethanol. But it also had, the primary gas tank was a CNG tank. And Petrobras has a vast network of CNG stations all over the country. And interestingly enough, all the big American boys that sell stuff down there, like Exxon, which is called Esso down there, Texaco, Shell, Repsol, if you want to be in the Brazilian market, the Brazilian government says you've got to sell all the products that Petrobras sells to the Brazilian people. Otherwise, you can't play in the market. So you can go to the Esso station, which is Exxon, and buy CNG or ethanol or gasoline. And the same with Shell, same with Texaco, same with Repsol, so on. So this was 7 years ago, so this technology is not new. Good news for America, now that Chrysler is kind of under the control of Fiat, Sergio Marchionne, the CEO, or chairman of Fiat and now Chrysler, Fiat has done more with natural gas vehicles than any of the major automobile companies. So Chrysler, an American company, is ready to jump on this bandwagon, and they have, teamed up with Fiat, the premier company that operates in the space. So I'm expecting very good things, and I think, Chrysler will probably lead General Motors and even Ford, to this promised land. The good news is even General Motors and Ford, as well as the Japanese companies and Volvo and others, they're doing NGVs everywhere else but here. Okay, so it will come, and I think it will actually come very quickly. The automobile manufacturers in the U.S. have been talking about this chicken and egg problem. If you guys would build the stations, if you oil companies would build the stations that run, to sell the CNG, then we'd build the cars. Well, my contention is that the oil industry has no incentive to do that in the United States because it very much devalues the value of their downstream marketing and refining operations. So if they're not going to do it, then Clean Energy Bridge will do it, and I guess Boone Pickens' company will do it as well. So, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of others that jump on the bandwagon. Okay, next slide. Let's see. All right, this is one that I actually made up, which hopefully will become profound. But in the age of gas, the whole concept of peak oil actually begins to become an irrelevant concept. I just last night read an article in a magazine called Financial Intelligence Report, and the title of the article, "Cheap Oil is Gone Forever, What It Means for America and Your Personal Wealth." So it was a very, very interesting article, and they talk about $200 a barrel of oil and what it does to the economy, and it's a pretty bleak picture. And it's interesting because then, like the last paragraph, the author, who obviously is not in the energy sector, starts talking about potential alternatives, and almost an aside was natural gas for transportation. A lot of people, when they think about natural gas for transportation, they automatically think of electric cars, and that you're going to use the gas to burn the electricity to drive the cars. And every time I see an electric car, people go, "Oh, look at that car, it runs on electricity." I said, "No, it doesn't. The car runs on coal. Coal, it runs on electricity. Where do you think electricity came from?" So, the first cars, the Stanley steamers, ran on coal, and now, the electricity, the power industry would have us believe that we should run cars on coal again. Like we tried that 100 years ago, and it really didn't work. So anyway, I think electric cars do have a niche market, in Midtown Manhattan, in the Loop in Chicago, and, San Francisco Peninsula, places like that. But as, a nation with 250 or 240 million automobiles, I don't think that, we're going to, casting our future to the electric car is going to be folly. In particular, if you look at the fact that, it requires prodigious quantities of lithium, something that we have in very small supply. Bolivia has a lot, China has a lot, other countries that don't necessarily have our economic interests at heart have substantial lithium reserves, and I wouldn't want to trade the tyranny of the barrel for the tyranny of the battery. And so that's why I'm not a big advocate of prodigious amounts of electric vehicles. And electric vehicles and 18-wheelers, that doesn't work. Okay. All right, and then this was another one. It has nothing to do with this, but I just like the quote. "Good judgment comes from experience. Experience comes from bad judgment." Okay. And then I said, well, how can I make that relevant to this presentation? And I came up with one. I happen to think that the whole idea of taking gas, natural gas, beautiful methane, CH4, the cleanest hydrocarbon there is, and turning it into liquids like diesel, that is an exercise in bad judgment. So, and unfortunately, Dawn left. She's a good friend of mine, but she works for Shell, and they spent $25 billion in Qatar to do that. And you could have built 5 of the LNG export terminals for the price of that one gas to liquids thing. And the problem with the gas to liquids thing is that you're taking something inherently clean, turning it into something inherently dirty, and you have to expend 40 to 45% of the energy. Okay, if you start off with 100 energy units, what you have by the time you are ready to deliver that diesel fuel is 55 energy units. So you spent 45 energy units along the way just to convert the natural gas, something very clean, into something dirty. Now, if you liquefy it in the form of LNG, okay, where it's still methane, you spend 8. Basically, your efficiency of these massive LNG export trains is they're about 92% efficient. So you're gonna use 8% of the gas that way, and that includes the shipping, versus 45% going the GTL's way. So I think GTL's is an exercise in bad judgment. Okay, next slide, please. Let's see. This, I'll just kind of go through this really quick. I mean, you all have the presentation, so I'm not a big believer in reading them word for word. But, you know, here we are, let's see, as the day that we did this, the June contract was at 433. Just last week, I participated, you know, listening to a Platts webinar. Maybe some of you all did that. Bentech put it on. And they had a little poll, like, what do you think that the NYMEX contract's going to touch in the fall? And nobody, including myself, said $3, or very small. But Bentech's like, oh, it's going to $3. So, you know, maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong. But, you know, once they showed us how they got to that number, they made a very compelling case. But even if it isn't $3, it's going to be probably not more than $3.50. Now, we're talking about the nadir, the low point. And, of course, all bets are off if, you know, a Katrina-like hurricane pulls into town in late September, when that nadir usually occurs. You know, that obviously, you know, that $3 presumes that there won't be a Category 4 or 5 hurricane, or even a Category 1 or tropical storm in the Gulf at that time. But that is very significant, you know. I mean, $3, that was a number that I remember way back in the 90s when I first came into the industry. Oh, wow, $3, you know. And, you know, $2 was bad, $3 was great. Well, that's not good, you know, anymore. Okay, and this is an interesting little slide. It's just kind of a comparison of natural gas and oil, kind of historically, you know, on a per BTU basis. Okay, next slide. Okay, this, and I'm not going to get deep in this because you guys have heard all this before, but we got plenty of gas. And, you know, the number that I probably should have had highlighted is that for as long as I can remember, until the last 5 years, our reserves over production ratio in the U.S. has typically been around 10 to 1, between 9.5 to 10.2. And because of all the shale, you know, we now have an RP ratio of 13 to 1 and growing. So that is very substantial. Now, you know, and I'm not going to give you all a lesson in reserves and all, because you probably know, you know, what I'm talking about. That doesn't mean that in 13 years we're going to run out. It just means that that's 13, you know, in terms of what's behind pipe that you can produce, you know, economically today. There it is. Now, the interesting thing, though, is if the price goes down, then obviously that can affect that ratio, because now there's a lot of stuff that becomes uneconomic. So we don't want that to happen. So what are we going to do? We got to create more demand. That's what it's all about. So we got to create more demand. Okay. And then, of course, we've got, you know, depending upon who you believe, anywhere from 70 to 120. I've heard even people say 200 years, you know, resource base. But, you know, even if it's 100 years, that's a long time. And even if we increase the demand, so that now that number goes down because we've increased the demand, it's not going to go below 70. And that's a good number. You know, 7 years, I think we can figure out what the next thing is. And that's why we have the bridge in our title. This is the bridge to the future. It's maybe not the Valhalla future, but it's going to get us there.